Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Campaign Middle East on the Record podcast, where we speak to leaders in the region about the key trends and challenges shaping the Middle East brand and marketing industry. I'm Anup Oman, the editor of Campaign Middle East, and joining me on the show today is Ahmed El Gamal, the executive director of marketing, who's been a marketer for 16 years now?
15 plus years now, yeah.
Welcome to the show, Ahmed, and thanks for joining us after a wonderful campaign breakfast briefing event.
Anup, thank you so much for having me. Really excited about being here, and I'm really looking forward to this podcast.
Wonderful. Pleasure to have you here. Let's get straight into it. There is this discussion that has been going on for decades, this tug of war, so to speak, between brand and performance. There are some marketers who say that, like Gianmarco Tamberi and Mutaz Basham shared the podium at the Olympics, brand and marketing should be at the top of the podium together in terms of priority list. But the truth is far from it. Mm-hmm. At the moment, it does seem like we are overreaching towards performance a bit, overcorrecting towards performance a bit. One, I don't want to make any assumptions, so I'll start by asking, do you agree with that? And two, how can we get to a more balanced approach?
Look, the fact is we have been overcorrecting for performance, and probably goes back to the days of COVID, right? Where, you could really put a dollar, e-commerce was booming, you put a dollar, you see how far your dollar is going. But unfortunately, that model can be broken if you just leave it to run for a long time. Mm-hmm. We've seen brands like Airbnb sort of disrupt that and say, you know what, we're not going to do performance, and we're going to switch to brand build, and they've seen great success stories. You said something earlier that it's a tug of war. But it doesn't have to be a tug of war, right? I sat in a few webinars and actually a session by the Marketing Society recently when they invited, the team from Work and they had teams from Profit, etc., where they spoke about the multiplier effects, right? I'm sure you've seen that. And it's not about brand versus performance, right? It's actually brand and performance. And ultimately, when you start to treat them as separate, and if they're separate teams, and that's where the problems arise, because each team has a different KPI. But ultimately, the role of brand is to create demand, right? It's to create, desirability. So brand should really be called demand. If anything, it's not about, the brand aspect. Because when you think of it as brand, sometimes our mindset goes straight to awareness. And it's not just about awareness. There's so many other KPIs you can consider, because brand allows you to raise your pricing, pricing power, right? For you to create value. So if you're able to create value through brand initiatives or demand initiatives, then performance supplements it. When you try to compare them together and you always just say it's either or, that's where the problem arises. Performance is like a sugar rush.
Do you think this sits towards the top where one person oversees brand plus performance, or is it culturally that should run through the organization? Everyone gets on board with not just your short-term KPIs, so to speak, but also the long-term vision that you're trying to achieve.
I think strategy should be integrated. You could have separate leaders or separate, functions for both, but it needs to live on an integrated plan, right? And I think this is where the problem is. I was about to say earlier that performance is really like the sugar, and brand is like nutrition. Right. You need both, right? So when the team is cycling in one end and the other one cycling in another end, if they're going in different opposite ends and they're not speaking to one another, this is where the problem arises.
Then it feels like a tug of war.
Then it feels like a tug of war, when ultimately they should be meeting together, speaking together, and ultimately sharing they should have shared KPIs. If they don't have shared KPIs, even if they're separate functions, if they don't have shared KPIs, then this is where the model's broken.
Wonderful. Stepping outside of just that role within the company, within a client side, if I can call it that, in this industry, there's also this conversation around agency-client relationships, right? And this has come, and we'll touch procurement a bit later, but it's drawn from the fact that what used to be really long retainers have become shorter and shorter and shorter over a period of time, where people start focusing on projects and very, specific campaigns, performance-driven campaigns rather than overall brand. There's almost this feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, that agency-client relationships have become less about relationships and more about transactions. Is that the case? And if so, how can we correct back to a place where it becomes a little more meaningful? It becomes a relationship. It becomes something that you're working on shared goals together, and not just a project or a campaign together.
If you have a transaction with an agency, expect a service. If you treat them like a partner, you get great work, you get credibility, you get creativity, you get trust. And I think what happens is sometimes, and we're going to get into, procurement, as you said, it's a two-way street. There's a whole relationship and bonding and a people side to agencies and clients. You shouldn't really necessarily treat them as vendors. Both client side and agency side have a responsibility to get to know each other a lot better. Get to know each other's KPIs. Yes, you have a campaign KPI. You brief agency X and say, our KPI is to reach XYZ people or grow business incrementally. But what is the overall bigger picture, right? Agencies tend to live in the fourth P, promotion side, right? And if you're living in the fourth P, not knowing the nuances of the business and nuances of the enterprise, the other three Ps, and if you don't know how that business makes money, or know your personal client's KPIs, and if the client doesn't know the agency's KPIs, the model doesn't work. So there's a whole relationship aspect in a conversation that needs to have, and that sometimes within a pitch or within an RFP, you have that chemistry meeting. But how much of that chemistry meeting is going deep versus I like their energy.
I
so
like
you need to
you go to the gym, and I like the shirt you wear.
Yeah, we like the same football team.
Yeah.
Right, cool, great. But then beyond that, what are your personal KPIs? What are your personal KPIs? How does your business make money? What are your sort of, challenges outside of this brief? So there's so much more outside of the brief that clients need to share with agencies. And there's so many more questions that agencies need to ask to make sure the relationship's successful. And it's not a transaction, it's a relationship.
We spoke about the 4 Ps that marketers wake up to, but there are the 3 Ps that keep them up at night, which is procurement, pricing, pitching, right? We've spoken to, and this seems to be the theme of the month almost. I've spoken to government side clients, I've spoken to brand side marketers, I've spoken to agency side leaders, and there seems to be a little bit coming out from both sides, right? From the client side, there's an expectation for clearer briefs, clearer transparency around evaluation criteria, the request for better feedback, more feedback, if any feedback is given at all in certain instances. On the agency side, there's also this demand for agencies among themselves to start holding themselves up to, protecting their own IP, protecting their own creativity, looking at both cost and value. And of course, at the end of the day, understanding that it's not just the agency and client relationship, it's the agency, client, and procurement relationship that needs to be built. Your thoughts?
Look, I would say over the last years, we've seen procurement really level up to understand agencies. Okay. Just like there's a brand value that we've spoken about earlier, there is a agency value that procurement teams have really started to learn. I think the model as an overall, the systems that we're so used to, the way we play, is potentially needs a bit of a shakeup, right? Right now, you go out to an agent, or if you have an RFP, and if you need to do it because procurement's asking you to do it, you go out to the best and the biggest agencies in the region, right? But the more you go out to these agencies without a feedback loop, without a proper process, without a proper evaluation criteria, without actually sticking to the timelines that you've committed to and sticking to the promise of what this brief is in the process, this is where you start to lose trust from the agencies. And agencies, at the same time, sometimes some agencies get very lazy, right? Equally, you could receive a proposal from an agency where it's creds and it misses the mark completely, which is a complete waste of time.
So is that them trying to be everything for everyone, or is it just missing the mark?
It's missing the mark. It's definitely, being everything for everyone that's a selection process, whether you accept the brief or not accept the brief. But if you accept the brief and give a lazy submission, that's just, why are you doing it? Is there a point? But if there's no feedback loop, and that ultimately impacts the industry, because it's a small industry. Names are known, agencies are known, and there needs to be a potentially, maybe a third party that could come in and say, we are going to, govern this process. Potentially, there could be a pitching fee. Maybe, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but it's
there are global entities across, and I won't take the markets, but there are markets in which there are entities that permit for a pitching fee.
For sure.
Yeah. Do you think that we could build an appetite for a regulatory body like that?
I think we should. Yeah. I don't think we're far. I don't think it's the interest of the industry, both client side and agency side, to have a regulatory body. What happens then, you have better briefs, you have sharper timelines, and you have more transparency. And when you have more transparency, people tend to start to trust the process, because right now the process is, this kind of, it's a bubble, and it's a bit of a black hole, and you send an email, you don't know what's happening, and and to be fair, I mean, it's no one's fault.
No, but it's true, because from the client side also, there are times where it could be budget issues, it could be approvals, it could be, just the fact that we changed our mind, right? And we're not going to go ahead with something. But I think it is a communication piece.
For sure.
It is a transparency piece. It's a relationship piece. But I want to go beyond that and ask you, is this an education piece as well, or is it a culture piece that needs to be addressed?
I think the education piece comes in the junior teams and the smaller agencies and the people that have not necessarily worked in complex processes or complex environments. That's definitely an education. I'd say culturally, I don't think this is an isolated problem just in the Gulf, right? I think this is slightly more global. I think
no, but I mean industry culture, not
industry
Gulf culture.
Right.
It's almost like, oh, but this is the way it works. We whine about it, but we don't do anything about it.
When I think about it, I could probably tell you the tender process in other industries are also a bit of a black hole, right? Be it pharma, be it construction. There's so many other industries where you put a tender and you're like, well, where's it going? So I think it's not necessarily a culture. I think it's an education and a process, in my personal humble opinion.
Fair enough. Appreciate the opinion. Let's move on. Another piece that we'd like to peel the onion on is around, and it goes back to brand, is around tech and trends, right? So there are companies who look at AI, let's do AI for the sake of AI, right? But I like the pushback on creative that has come back, because there are campaigns, if you look at the award-winning campaigns, I know awards aren't the be-all and end-all of everything. There are brand and business outcomes we look at, but there are brand business outcomes and awards that have been effective for using AI as a tool when it's needed and completely skipping it when it's not, right? Similar to this, there are companies, and this goes back to the brand performance conversation that we're having, that there are clients, agencies that come in for a specific campaign or specific project, and they need to hit their metrics or KPIs. And in doing so, follow a trend without understanding brand. And is there a piece where we need to tell and, open this conversation out to say that, no, we should not be chasing trends, but understand brand? Because not always do trends align with brand. And sometimes trends might not be brand safe at all.
I mean, your question kind of answers it. You said, I mean, first of all, AI is a tool. Right. Let's establish that it's a tool. It's a means. Right now, today, we're not at a stage where AI is completely taking over yet. We're very close, but today it's a tool. When agencies and/or brands jump on trends without asking why and not looking at the why are they doing this is the biggest problem, because then what you start to see is a saturation. Take, for example, the Studio Ghibli sort of wave that's been around for the last month. And Toy Box, and you could sort of go back to even before AI, not even into AI. If you look at the Harlem Shake, you know what I mean? When not every brand, a lot of brands did the Harlem Shake, but what is the why? Yes, it's to try to be culturally relevant, but when brands start to jump on culture, it stops becoming cool, right? And it becomes a bit of an ick, and then people stop caring about it. But when you start to put in AI, and AI is an enabler because AI is speed, and you're trying to be fast in the market, and you try to show relevance, if you swap the logos, the work is the same. So how do you differentiate from one brand from another if you're talking about brand, right? So how do you start establishing your brand equity, right? There are brands out there that are jumping on trends, but they're doing it very, very, I'd say intelligently, despite the disruption that they're doing. For example, Duolingo, right? I mentioned, I admire that brand. I think they do some pretty cool work. They jump on trends, but they don't jump on trends the cliche way where every single brand is jumping on a trend like Studio Ghibli. They figure out the nuances and say, right, there's something happening there with Dua Lipa that we could do, and we'll jump on that. So there's ways for brand, but that's relevant because that's their DNA, and that works for them, right? There are brands that don't jump on trends at all, like Apple, right? Doesn't jump on trend. They don't need to. They've established their brand sort of sort of brand story and brand hierarchy and brand heritage and everything people know about them, that's not them. So I think there needs to be thought and consideration. Is this the right trend for you? Is it going to add value, or are you going to fall into a sea of sameness between everyone else?
Does that come back to agencies and clients actually coming around the table and having a conversation rather than just ideating, implementing, and moving
100%. 100%. I mean, look, we're in an industry.
And the reason I'm asking this is because I don't want to play the blame game.
No.
But at the same time, let's all take onus of our responsibilities.
Absolutely. No, there's no blame. The industry is a high volume, quick turnaround industry. Where we live in performance dashboards, where we see it all the time. We live in social dashboards where we, see hashtags and trends going up and down, and it's all about agility. Be agile, be agile, be agile. Have live content teams, and we're pushing for that. I mean, we're actually, the narrative is the industry is pushing for that narrative. So if we're going to push for that narrative, and we're saying, well, you shouldn't really, jump on the trend because the trends are bad. So what are we really saying? So we probably need to have better conversations and more purposeful conversations on what should we jump on and what shouldn't we jump on, and have some guidelines around it.
And it's not just what, it's the why.
For sure.
Yeah, it's the why piece behind it. I think we've run through this conversation extremely quickly. Before we conclude, there is a bunch that, I want to peel the onion on, but I'll leave this to you. So the power of this conversation goes to you, Ahmed. Is there anything specifically, if I were to give you this opportunity to speak to the audience, speak to our marketers, speak to, agency leaders, ad tech players within the market, what's the message?
I think where we are right now, it's 2025. It's, the trend has been scaling and speed, right? How do we scale fast and speed fast? And we have the tools that enable us to do so. If we step back for just that 1 second, I think the winners, aren't the ones that are going to scale fast and speed fast, but are the ones that are going to look at trust and credibility. And that's internally and externally with audiences. So I think that is one advice I would give to the industry, because if without trust and without credibility from your audience, lots of brands will start to struggle. So that's one point. Second point, going back to our breakfast briefing the other day, upskilling, right? Upskilling is crucial. I mean, every single day you see a new trend. Like, I'm an architect. That's how I started my career. I woke up this morning and, scrolling on social media, I see this really innovative way of drawing architecture buildings that if you do one line, the 3D is done in
BIM models, Revit models.
No, it's like beyond. It's the first time I've seen that one.
Wow.
Right. Okay. It wowed me.
Okay.
Right. And I sent it to a few of my architecture friends, and the reactions were, what's going on? So I think we need to upskill fast and upskill at speed. And the problem with upskilling that we spoke about the other day is, by the time you're done the traditional process of upskilling, something new has come up. So I think the upskilling and having the appetite and having sort of the growth mindset to say, what, we'll be okay. We need to find the ways to pivot is very important across any organization.
Is that a learning how to learn, or just wake up with the appetite to be better?
I think, learning, I mean, from a leadership perspective, we need to learn how to unlearn our old ways and relearn something new and be open to relearning. But for the new teams, it's to honestly challenge the status quo. And, they're pretty good at it. I mean, they have the hunger and the energy, but relearning things and always trying something new, that's really the key to success right now.
I like that. I mean, I like the fact that the Middle East marketing industry is moving in leaps and bounds, and we're growing exponentially, but we have to challenge the status quo. Isn't that the perfect way to end this discussion? Thank you for joining us on this conversation on this episode of Campaigns on the Record podcast. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe for more such conversations with leaders in the industry. Thank you, Ahmed, for joining us.
Thank you, Anup. Appreciate it.